Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We do hope you're keeping very, very safe and well. Thank you so much for joining us for our third show of the week. Busy week on Last Word on Spurs as we build up, of course, to the start of the Premier League season. And in the midst of that, we're in, of course, the summer transfer window. We've had obviously some amazing journalists join us on Last Word on Spurs. And safe to say, we've got another one of those tonight that's going to give us some real insight into what is happening behind the scenes, behind the curtain of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. It's all going on. It's all going on. This man, he looks very, very well behind the scenes at the moment, but I tell you, it's all going on behind Tottenham scenes at the moment. Joining me, back alongside me, despite the dogs threatening to take the Wi-Fi, run away with it, I'm delighted to have back alongside me my wonderful co-host, Matt Hayes. Matt, how are you, bud?
Look, I think let's talk about what people want to know. They don't care how I am. The dogs are fine. The dogs are absolutely perfect. They were a little bit guilty for a day or two. I only got my internet back yesterday. It was nearly a week without it. It was an absolute nightmare. But yeah, I'm also fine. I'm delighted to be back on the show again and looking forward to a great chat with Mike.
Yeah, I don't want to upset you, Matt. I mean, the more concern was when I said that you're not going to be with us. What about the dogs? Are the dogs okay? I just said the dogs are fine. Matt will be back with us next week. So Matt is here. So really looking forward to obviously having Matt back alongside me and join us tonight. Look, many will, of course, know this man when they're, of course, looking through social media on all things Tottenham. He's covered some of the big Tottenham stories that we've seen in the past. God, you can probably, I don't want to age Mike, definitely the last 18 months, couple of years in terms of all things Tottenham. We've got the brilliant Mike McGrath on, football reporter for the Telegraph Sport. Mike, lovely to finally have you on Last Word on Spurs. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. And thanks for having me on as well. It's been a long time coming, actually. I know you asked that last season, and I don't do them often, actually. I don't do a lot of podcasts. I'm just quite busy, really, with everything else. So it's really good. I thought I'd definitely make an effort for you guys. I saw Dharmesh on as well, so I thought, geez, if he's on, I better get on as well.
Is it just the case, Mike, that I'm just wondering from the outside looking in, these journalists are thinking, God, Tottenham, there's such a basket case here. I've got to have my tuppence worth as well and so everyone what's going on and kills even more hysterics for them.
Yeah, look, it's as I've said to you two, previously, Tottenham, it is just such a newsworthy club. They're not in Europe. Yet their back page stories on Tottenham, and that's been down the years since. I mean, you say like I've been at the Telegraph for a while now. I actually covered Spurs a little bit when I was at the Press Association as well. I was their Tottenham correspondent for a few years in the Harry Redknapp years, and when Martin Jol was sacked during the game, these guys I was there as well. It's always had just real newsworthy stories about them. Doesn't matter what's going on in terms of the league table or whether they're in Europe. They can always find their way onto the back page because they're just an interesting club where stuff goes on all the time.
It's funny you say that, Mike, because I mean, as Spurs fans, we just think, oh, it's just another day in the life of Tottenham Hotspur. But as a reporter as you are, where obviously Tottenham are not just your only club, from the outside with the other clubs that you do cover, are Spurs the most balmiest and craziest?
Well, down the years, you could say, because they went through that. They went through the spells where they were kind of transfer deadline day kind of masters, or kind of I don't know, maybe not masters, but they were certainly like in the forefront of the headlines for deadline day. And yeah, they're just really newsworthy with everything they do. And yeah, it's just the personnel changes. Behind the scene changes, apart from Daniel, obviously, but behind the scene changes, but it just remains what it is, which is just a really interesting club to cover.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Daniel there. I mean, a lot of fans will be saying that's obviously the one constant in the last 15, 20 years, that the chairman has remained, and yet so many managers have come and gone, likewise the players. So there's a lot to discuss tonight, of course, with Tottenham Hotspur. Of course, look, a lot of things going off the pitch at the moment, and in terms of on it as well, we've had an interesting pre-season, to be fair. And I think the only place I can start, if you don't mind, Mike, is asking you about Spurs' new head coach, Ange Postecoglou. I know many people will feel, Spurs fans in general, that if we had that clear communication from the manager that we've got in relation to the hierarchy, we've been a much more, I think, comfortable and reassuring place. He's come in. I think he's made a really good impression for the majority of Spurs fans. I think it's fair to say pre-season has been an interesting time. We've had the 2 wins, 2 defeats of the pre-season. We've conceded all of them. We've scored 14 goals, conceded 900 plus shots as well. I think many will feel buoyant by the brand of football that's been on offer in those friendlies. But I want to ask you about the appointment, 4-year contract. What do you personally think of the appointment of Ange Postecoglou and the early impressions for you of having him in the Premier League and, of course, as the new Tottenham Hotspur head coach?
My first impressions is really positive, actually. I think, look, he's obviously not got Premier League experience. We know that, but from the way he was at Celtic and Australia before, I think there is clearly a very, very talented coach there who has been waiting to get his chance in the big time, shall we say? And I think, look, you mentioned those results during pre-season, which I think you can read so much into that. But I think the way he's conducted himself has been really, really positive. And that is the fact that it was a bit of a shambles with there's one game called off, wasn't there? So they basically, they flew in and went out. And the way he dealt with that, this is only just a minor flashpoint, but the way he dealt with the ambushing of the press conference with the Harry Kane shirt, I think, it points to somebody who has got authority, who has got kind of he has knowledge of what he's good at, which is managing those situations, and I think managing players as well. So that, for me, that, like you mentioned communication, and I think that's really important. That Aussie way is very, very likable. The language of the language of the pool hall being brought to the office is very likable, and I can see players relating to that as well as fans. And in terms of the football played, it is, dare I say it, kind of a Tottenham kind of way, in terms of there has been some promise that there will be attacking football played, and that there will be some entertainment on the way, and it won't be about boring Tottenham to 1-0 victories, which has never really gone down that well.
It hasn't indeed. Like I say, let's hand over to Matt. Matt, let's kick over to you.
Yeah, you touched already, Mike, on kind of the hierarchy of the club and Daniel Levy and the changes within that structure underneath him. And I want to just touch on that a little bit more. We know the new Chief Football Officer, Scott Munn, who is working with the club, but whether or not he's officially started is, of course, up in the air. But given that he has worked with Ange Postecoglou in the past, you would have to assume that he was somewhat involved with identifying and appointing the new manager for Spurs. I'm just interested to see what you have to say about whether you think Daniel Levy might be taking a step back from the footballing operations at the club. He threatened it a little bit with the appointment of Fabio Paratici a couple of years ago. But do you think we could see him take that step back? And I suppose a follow-on from that as well, where do we stand at the moment with our search for a replacement for Paratici?
The answer in one word is no. I don't think he will. I think, and that's me being facetious, but I just think Daniel is he's that football guy. I don't think you could ever take that away from him, and the kind of the way the machinations of the transfer market and running a club the way he does. I don't know. I don't know for certain, but I would think that'd be really difficult for him to walk away from and take a step back and say, I can't. I'm not going to do that anymore, because he has been known as one of the Premier League's most severe and also the toughest negotiator when it comes to transfers, when it comes to contract negotiations with existing players. He's and I think my personal view is it's in his blood. And then you have somebody like Paratici coming in, or Scott Munn coming in, would be to assist him in his job rather than to take over. That's how I view the situation. I think Scott Munn's really interesting appointment. I'm actually not sure whether they actually have worked together. Matt, you might know better than me. I know they're certainly in the A-League at the same time, so we'll know him very, very well and how he operates. And that Australian way of they have a history in that country. I'm half Aussie myself, actually, but they have a history in elite sport of having the processes in the right way in cricket and getting the very best out of in that country is what is a very small population, and so I think with that type of mentality, I think that's it's quite a positive step for Spurs.
Do we know, out of interest, just to follow up on there, Mike, do we know eventually when Scott Munn will begin this role? I mean, it's been delayed from we understand.
Isn't it?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, it just seems bizarre. I mean, I say it seems like a really, really important role at the football club that they identified Daniel quite some time ago. Should we be concerned that he hasn't officially started yet? Or we have seen images of him behind the scenes. He's been out in obviously on the tours as well, from what we understand. Should we be concerned that he hasn't officially started work?
I'm not sure about concern. I mean, look, there's been a delay, so there's something gone on there with his severance or his departure from the City Group, who would have rated him very highly, or they wouldn't have given him that job in the first place. What I would say is that from the people that I speak to, that I've heard Rebecca Caplehorn's name mentioned a lot in the last couple of years as somebody who is extremely has an extremely good professional relationship with agents, negotiating for their players, and also there is Leonardo Gabbanini, who's doing a lot of work as well behind the scenes, who people are speaking positively of as well. So in terms of getting the meetings done and recruiting the players, so I don't think it's a massive. I don't think it'd be a huge concern that it's not there. But obviously, you'd like it to be sooner rather than later, because you want the whole process of this new regime to be working and up and running.
You would indeed. Okay, well, listen, we shall wait for the developments of Scott Munn then. I do want to ask you about Spurs' window so far. We've seen earlier this week Spurs completing deals for the Netherlands under-21 in Mickey van der Ven, and following that, Spurs completed the signing of Alejo Veliz. For Tottenham, obviously, that, of course, was for them their respective 5th and 6th signings of the window after the arrivals of James Maddison and Ashley Phillips, along with, obviously, earlier in the window, William Vicario and Israeli winger Manus Solomon. Really keen to get your thoughts on what you've made of Tottenham's window so far, Mike, on the basis that, let's be honest about it, they started off fairly quick with momentum. It then slowed down. It has picked up again now. I know fans still want more. I'm in that camp as well. How would you so far rate the business Spurs have done in this transfer window?
I think it's a mix, because I personally view the transfers in terms of how much risk you're going to get, how much risk you've got versus what you're kind of guaranteed. And I think if you start off positively, I just think James Maddison is an absolutely fantastic signing. And I think he would be a player that could easily play for, I'm not saying he'd be a first team player for a regular for Man City, but I think for any team in the club, in the Premier League, he talent wise, I think he's right up there. He earned his place back in the England squad on merit. He's now playing in important games for England. I think that was a really, really good bit of business. Very exciting. One of the because it was early in the window, maybe a bit under the radar in terms of us building up into this season. But I think he could be a match-winning player for Spurs. So I think that is a fantastic bit of business. But then, just on the flip side of that, I do think that Spurs have gambled on some of their signings, and these gambles could easily pay off. I mean, Vicario in goal. You don't know how that could go one of two ways. I mean, he could be a fantastic addition, or Hugo Lloris are huge gloves to fill eventually when he leaves. So I think that's a risk. I think Van der Ven is a risk. I mean, these are calculated risks, obviously, that Spurs are taking. and I think they obviously have scouted them and believe in them. I do still think that it waits to be seen. People respond to this responsibility and being in the first team in different ways. Some of them absolutely thrive. Van der Ven could be the next Van Dijk, for all I know. But obviously, we haven't seen him do it at that international level yet, or at the Premier League level yet. So that's the question mark that remains on those signings.
Can I ask you, before Matt comes back in there, Mike, just on the goalkeeping situation? You mentioned Vicario there, and I was at the Lane the weekend. It was only a friendly against, of course, Shakhtar Donetsk in that 5-1 victory. And then obviously we followed up and watched him in Barcelona. I'm not even going to say that. I don't think really, if I look at the 4 games of pre-season, I can't sit there and say that he's been at fault for every goal. I would maybe be honest and say I don't think he's been at fault for any of the goals. But my slight concern about Vicario is that his positioning does concern me. And the fact that I think, as you've kind of mentioned there, it is a gamble. I look at him and in the most politest way say this, I think he's a bit of a project goalkeeper. I think he may make mistakes. I think you're going to have to really stick with him through what's going to be maybe a potentially tricky period where he's going to adapt to the Premier League with obviously a new manager, new players, new system. And I've mentioned that point, that defence still could change between now and the end of the window. So theoretically, he's not going to have a stable back line ahead of him for these first few weeks. I look down the road and I hate to look at that situation now in hindsight, but Spurs, from what we understood, and again, you'd be maybe to tell us a bit more detail, Spurs look like they agreed personal terms with David Raya. They just didn't want to essentially bite the bullet and pay what it would have been an extra 10, 15 million to get him over the line. It sounds like they wanted to move early to get the goalkeeper in. In hindsight, when you look at Arsenal, and I think they've got David Raya for arguably 10 million less than what Brentford were originally asking for. Have we done the right thing? Personal opinion on it?
I think, like I say, I do think Vicario is a gamble. We've had very, very good keepers come to the Premier League. I'm just off the top of my head. You had Fulham recently had Rico come in as a very, very good Spanish keeper, and then all of a sudden he couldn't catch the ball basically, and they had Marcus Bettinelli in goal, and it's not straightforward. Even David De Gea, who had such a long career at Manchester United, he had time. It took time for him to adapt to English football. And what you're saying about his positioning is absolutely relevant when it comes to somebody who's been playing in Italy, who comes in and has to adapt very quickly to a very different way of football, and he'll have to do it very, very quickly. So I think the Raya deal, that if Spurs don't want to pay that kind of money for somebody with 1 year left on their contract, that's fair enough. That's their situation on it. I think if Arsenal, it would be a kick in the teeth if Arsenal do get this on an initial loan with an option, which is a suggestion tonight. They could be an initial loan. Then you would think, that is a real chance missed. I do think there's been a few kind of added parts to this story, because with Raya, I think there have been clubs lurking in the background, looking at him on a Bosman 2024, which has been part of it, and also obviously Bayern Munich, who've been in the market for a goalkeeper while Neuer's injured, which kind of brought them to the table. Maybe that kind of hurried things along with Arsenal.
Interesting. Matt, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think as much as we might be kicking ourselves looking back at that, what could have happened between us and David Raya, I think Brentford might be the same, because they're not guaranteed the fee. Like you're saying, Mike, looking like a loan deal now at the moment. I think they might be realising now that they held out for a little bit too much. And I personally think Spurs did the right thing from moving on from that deal, because we're looking at, I know we'll touch on it more later, but for Harry Kane and for other players like Romeo Lavia at Southampton and Moises Caicedo at Brighton, this is a window where selling clubs can name their price and they don't have to go into those negotiations, because there is so much money out there in the market. Or Brentford maybe just had that number a little bit too high and they're paying for it now. But with those signings that Ricky mentioned earlier, Mike, it looks as though Tottenham have ticked the boxes that were identified and widely reported earlier in the window, that being a goalkeeper, a couple of centre-backs who can play in both the left and right positions, along with potentially a winger and a creative midfielder. Are you aware if these were the exact positions that Spurs had identified at the beginning of the window, or are there other parts of that pitch that we maybe should keep our eye on?
I think so. I think that was. I'm just trying to go through your list now. I think that is right. Yeah, with obviously the goalkeeper they brought in, centre back, and they might bring one more in. I'm not sure about money in terms of whether they've got money for the absolute top line centre back. Now they've spent quite a lot on Van der Ven, and then like you say, you're looking at a midfielder. I've reported myself on the Conor Gallagher situation, which could well be something to look at before the deadline. And then obviously forward line, we'll speak about Harry Kane later, and I think there is the market for that. But the extra centre back's is quite interesting actually to look at, what kind of market there is for that in terms of what they want to spend on it if they do get one more in.
It's interesting. Obviously, he was asked the question, Postecoglou, last night after that Barcelona friendly, and he was asked about bringing one more in. He said, yeah, potentially. Again, we've got to make sure that we keep the squad manageable and see what happens with the outgoings. But there is potential to bring one more in. We know, obviously, of course, on the last couple of days, Mike, the club have been heavily linked with moves for still Bayer Leverkusen's Edmund Tapsoba. That's been a name that's been reoccurring during this summer window so far. Fulham defender Tosin Adarabioyo. And Torino's, a new name that's come up in the last week or so, Torino's Per Skruz. I hope I pronounced that right. And everybody's favourite backup option, I say that in jest, not because everyone's favourite backup option, that's Clement Longley, who is looks like he's waiting in the wings for anybody to take him, bar a Saudi club, which he's not interested in. He apparently has his heart set on Tottenham. Tell me, from your position, Mike, do you have any knowledge as to what Spurs will do with that additional defender? Who do you think, if you had a hunch on it, we might be looking to bring in between now and the end of the window?
Well, I mean, Langley would be obviously easy to do in terms of they've been there before to do. Adebayor at Fulham's a really interesting one actually, because he doesn't play. He's not necessarily. He's not one that. He's not one that's you think as an absolute. One of the top 5 centre backs, but I do know that his data, the analysts love him, and he's got really good data. And I think he's been on the kind of on the notepads of a few big clubs because his data is really good for what he does. So I also, I think Bremer at Juventus was definitely on the Paratici list before he left, but I think he's proving to be very expensive. I think you're talking about 50 million euros there. And I think he's said, look, I want to stay and win trophies with Juventus. I think Tapsoba, expensive as well. So, Tapsoba's always been there. You think out of that list that you said, that would be he'd be the consistent one that's been there. And the lad at Torino is the new name on that. I don't know if there is one leader in terms of those centre backs, but certainly that's a market that they've already been in when they were looking at Van der Ven. So it'd be a case of getting the best value and what money's available for that and other positions as well.
You might not know it, Mike, but do you think the money is genuinely there to go in and get another, what you would call higher class, higher profile centre back, the likes of, dare I say, a Tapsoba? Do you think the money's there? It's always felt this window. It's always been one or the other. That's the feeling. Is that what you've had a feeling as a journalist as well, or not necessarily?
My feeling is that that they would have to kind of raise the money. They'd have to raise the money through sales. They do have assets in terms of some players like Tanguy and Ndombele that can raise some money. But rather than, we've got a war chest of 100 million that we could just drop on. That's the feeling that I've got just from speaking to my contacts in the market. I've been trying to put some deals together. But then you always, it's clubs find a way as well, when they need it, and pressure gets put on to the chairman from wherever, from the fans or the manager or the sporting director, that they really need to spend, that clubs do also find a way. So I'm not saying never say never, but that was certainly the feeling that I've got during the window.
Look, if we are going to get that extra centre back that Postecoglou wants, aside from financial reasons, you'd imagine that we are going to have to move out some of the defenders in that bloated 39-man squad that will have reports like Chelsea with players outside the dressing room during training, which we don't necessarily want. Like you reported yesterday, that Leeds have agreed a deal to sign Joe Rodon on a season-long loan deal. And we also have players like Davinson Sanchez and Japhet Tanganga who are understood to be available for the right price. I assume we're going to see at least one or two of them go out. Which ones do you think we might see move on from Spurs this summer?
Yeah, I think Sanchez, from the outside looking in, looked very, it was very sad when he was booed by the fans. I just, I wasn't at the game, but kind of just saw the highlights. I thought it was really, and it did look like the end for him. The whole Russia, the Spartak bid brought in a lot of questions about the ethics of dealing with Russian clubs. But in general, during his time at Spurs, I thought that he was somebody with athleticism and a skill level that would find a decent club in Europe. Tanganja's a strange one because he gets linked with the big Milan clubs, but he's never actually happened for him. So I'm not quite sure what that market is. If we take away the noise on kind of Inter Milan and AC Milan, I'm not quite sure what his market is, and really what level you consider him to get serious money in, and that's kind of out of the central defenders anyway, and then maybe you might see a little bit of movement from the fullbacks as well, where you could see a little bit bloated in that area as well.
I mean, the mad thing is, as you kind of refer to there, like, it's a 39-man squad. I mean, it's unthinkable that Spurs could go into the start of a season, let alone the end of a window, with that amount of players. I think Arteta was quoted recently as saying 25 was unmanageable. So, yeah. I mean, on that basis, I mean, they've got a lot of work to them. They might, between now and the end of this window, you're looking at, they've got to try and get at least, and tell me if I'm wrong here by thinking this, they've got to try and get at least, 10, 12 players out, whether it be on loan or departures? Am I OTC there, or do you agree?
No, I think so. Or else you're going to have a big bomb squad, as they used to call them down the years, of people not given a squad number, and it's but this will be the skill of Spurs' recruitment department to get to find these players at home. I mean, we've touched on the centre backs. I think the full backs, you've got somebody like Jed Spence, who's really interesting because he could, when he joined, he couldn't immediately join a Premier League club. It's actually a rule that you can't join a Premier League club and then get loaned to a Premier League club. You have to go to the Championship or abroad. So, but I think he's a good Premier League loan for somebody, Jed Spence. So there's options like that to kind of trim the squad in all areas, and we spoke about and Tanguy as well. Who's obviously, I think he's still the club record signing. So, but he won the title with Napoli, and he is an asset, and that's what I think. That's even when he hasn't been in the team. Even though I didn't think that performance against that famous Burnley one where Jose said he didn't run. I didn't think it was as bad. I was there that day. I don't think it was as bad as Jose made out, and he was, and he did chuck him under the bus that night. But from then on, I think he's still been seen as an asset to the club in terms of somebody that can raise some money, which I think that they'll probably do this season, judging by pre-season.
Obviously, again, we've got a situation, as you mentioned there, Mike, it's not only just obviously Jed Spence. Ryan Sessegnon, you'd maybe feel for him that there might be a potential there to move on had he not had that injury that has obviously happened to him, which is obviously going to, you imagine, take him towards the end of the summer window and obviously not be able to be fit for a potential move. Sergio Reguilon, again, is an interesting one. I mean, these guys, we saw Reguilon last night, who, with no disrespect to him, I'm not sure that would have done anything for his price tag in terms of performance. Do you think, again, lightly, Reguilon, Spence, they will get out in terms of the club? They will get those moves between now and the deadline? You thought they've got to for their own career, right, to try and revive themselves?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've got a bit of a soft spot for Reguilon because he was during lockdown when we were in the matches. Everybody called him Reggie, and you could just hear it throughout in the empty stadium. Everybody just shouting Reggie to him, and so we'd always shout it to each other in the press box. But he's just. From looking like every inch a Real Madrid player, it doesn't look like it looks like it's kind of it's gone over him a little bit. So again, that's a really interesting one on where he might go because it looks like there's plenty there in terms of Ben Davies, who I think is just a really solid left back. And obviously Perisic's experience. You've got players ahead of Reguilon now, and he is one where I do wonder whether there's a home for him.
Before Matt does come back in, I just want to ask you about Perisic, because it seemed destined before really maybe the start of pre-season that Perisic was going to be one of those names that was going to be out the door. I mean, he's on a very, very high wage. He's only got the year left. Where do you think we stand with Perisic? Do you think he is being warmed to by Postecoglou? There's a chance that he might now stay at the club. He's had a very impressive pre-season. Where do you think the land lies on Perisic?
I think that he would be in my squad every week if I was manager. I think he's got proven quality and still got that turn of pace over that quickness to take on a player, which is a huge asset for a team. I would be reluctant to be letting him go, but obviously I think it was at the start of the window. It was more like that he wanted to go himself, but to cover those wages is not going to be easy at another club. That would really probably involve some kind of severance, which is not. But you don't want to be giving away money either if he could stay in the squad. So I mean, it hasn't happened so far. I mean, maybe it might if we get down the line and Spurs really need to trim that squad. But at the moment, you think it would have happened if he was going. It would have happened already.
Cool, Matt. I'll have that go, bud.
We're going to touch on a few potential midfield departures in a minute. Before we do that, I want to look at a few potential targets for Spurs that have been in the media. Of course, our priority target in James Maddison, we managed to get tied up a good few weeks ago at this point, but we have seen other reports of interest in Chelsea's Conor Gallagher, which you've also mentioned, and in the last few days, reports about Nottingham Forest's Brennan Johnson and Eberechi Eze from Crystal Palace. Do you know if these are genuine targets for Spurs at the moment?
So Eze, I've not heard myself. That's not one that's come across. I've come across in the calls that I've made, but Brennan Johnson certainly, from my information, that there is genuine interest there. That is somebody that Spurs are looking at. You mentioned him as a midfielder. I would consider him more as a forward who could play across the front line, and a very exciting talent that Forest, would possibly be up for selling at the right price. So he would be an expensive one, but I think, but certainly that is one that I've heard that they've been looking at.
Gallagher, I think just to follow up on what Matt said there, where are we with Conor Gallagher? Because it's one that you've reported on yourself. Is that one that you still feel has got legs? There was, I think, initial quotes come out saying Gallagher was fairly happy under Maurizio and would like to potentially work under him. Do you think, given the nature, again, we look at big squads, Chelsea got a massive squad. Do you see that potentially becoming an issue between now and the window? And if that's the case, Gallagher, how high up would you say he's on Spurs' radar if there is genuine interest there?
Yeah, I think my information is that he's right up there in terms of the midfielder that they want. I think Chelsea, if they get Tyler Adams, which is what we're led to believe, as well as Caicedo, who they're in the market for, then you'd think that they'd be those two plus the most expensive player in the Premier League, which is Enzo Fernandez, in that midfield, like three players there for two in that formation that Pochettino, as we know, likes to play. So I think Gallagher, there is still a possibility that he will move, and that Spurs would be right up there for him. West Ham have obviously moved on in terms of their signings. They've signed Alvarez from Ajax, or are certainly in the process of doing that, and have gone for James Ward-Prowse today. So I think Spurs would also have a clear run at it if that was the case.
Perfect. Okay, listen, what we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners on audio. For our watching audience here, we've got over 1,000 plus of you watching us live. Thank you again ever so much for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs during what's been a crazy, chaotic summer transfer window. And I'm not going to tell you what Mike told us in the green room, but it's fair to say, keep your eyes peeled. It's not going to be quiet. It's not going to be quiet. I'm doing an EastEnders there. Dun, 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 dun. And we're also joined by the wonderful Matty Hayes. Matt, back with us here on Last Word on Spurs. Because I've been doing a lot of talking, so I'm going to hand back over to Matt, and he can take on Jason McGovern's favourite Spurs player of all time, Tungi and Ndombele. So I'll hand back over to Matt, and Matt can take the next two. Matt, over to you, bud.
Yeah, look, we've touched on Ndombele a little bit already. I think every Spurs fan will tell you that he has the ability, he has the talent, but it's just everything that needs to come after that, which maybe has been lacking in the 4 years now that he's already spent at Spurs. He's suffered a knock in pre-season. I think he missed our first game against West Ham, and reports are indicating that Tottenham would be willing to let him go, with Galatasaray aiming to maybe get a deal done for about £11 million. Mike, do you think we're finally going to see an end to the nightmare saga that this has been since 2019?
It's nightmare, yeah. I've got a heavy heart with it, really, because I'm not quite sure we kind of ever knew what Ndombele could be, really, or kind of what he was. I thought he'd be really good as a number 6, and then when he started, it was like, well, actually, maybe he's more of a 10. He's actually a midfielder, or is he box to box? What have Spurs got on their hands? He's never really fulfilled any of that in terms of what he is, and there clearly is a really good player in there. Lyon have seen it, Napoli have seen it, and maybe Galatasaray, who kind of been putting a bit of a Premier League flavour to their team, might see it as well. So I do think just looking at in terms of how Postecoglou's kind of gone about pre-season, it looks like he's trying to pair up other people in that central midfield rather than having next season building a team around Ndombele, if ever that was a thought for anybody. I don't think that's gonna be the case.
Before Matt comes back in there, Mike, can I just ask you, do you think it's been genuinely an attitude problem with Ndombele, or do you just think it just, for whatever reason, like for example, this pre-season, he picked up an injury and it looks like Spurs have gone now with the idea of keeping Lo Celso over? Was it always, do you feel, going to be the case? When you look at the size of that squad, it may have always been maybe one of the two rather than it being both of them. Has he just been generally unlucky this pre-season, or do you think there is more behind the scenes to this? Why, with no disrespect, you look at the managers Spurs have had. I know you said earlier that maybe Jose was harsh on the day at Birmingham. I think I would quite agree with you on that point. But when you look at, for what we've paid out to the output we've got, it's not been anywhere near what I'm sure a lot of us wanted. And again, when you consider the player, I think when he was playing even in good form, he barely completed 90 minutes for us. So is it been a case of both of those aspects, or why do you think it just hasn't worked out for Ndombele at Tottenham, in your opinion?
I think that there was a degree of being really difficult to settle in. And I think there was a little flavour of it in the Amazon documentary when Daniel went to see him and said, and I mean, he didn't have the language. I'm not sure whether that's improved or not since. And there was certainly the feeling that he was kind of parachuted in, almost like an outsider, and with a huge amount of pressure to deliver, because he was a £50+ million signing. So I think he did. I think attitude problem is the wrong way to put it, but I think there was problems settling in, and he certainly felt more comfortable in other environments. Maybe that's down to the coaches as well to try and create that environment and bring the best out of him. So it looks like a real missed opportunity for Spurs, which in the past they've done as well. People haven't settled at the club and thrived elsewhere, and it looks like that's going to be the case with this one as well. And like you say, with the squad, you've got a lot of players in that position. You have Pape Sarr, who I don't think will move on. I think he will stay rather than be loaned out. Oliver Skip, I'm not sure about, but you got young players like that as well. And you'd think that Ndombele would be one that would certainly move on, because, and as I've mentioned before, it's primarily because he is still an asset. With 2 years left on his contract, you can get some money for him on the continent.
You mentioned there you're not sure about Oliver Skipp. I think we should just pop him up front after that performance in Spain last night. You know, he'll be our 30 goal a season striker. But Ndombele isn't the only midfielder at Spurs who's attracting attention from Europe, with Atletico Madrid having reportedly opened talks to sign Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, and the Danish midfielder seemingly wants the opportunity to join Atletico Madrid playing in the Champions League next season. Do you know where we stand on that one at the moment, Mike?
Well, there's been long-standing interest in him, for sure, from Atletico. So the only thing that I've just picked up on in terms of, I've obviously been working on the Conor Gallagher situation, but what I've picked up on just from the coverage of it in Spain is that he is on a list there, rather than they're certainly he's the only one on the list. So it would be a case of them going through their options and then going for him in the remaining time, the transfer window, rather than he's got a medical book tomorrow or anything like that.
Do you think, Mike, just on the basis of Højbjerg, if Spurs were to sell him, do you think they will go out and actively look for a replacement? You mentioned Pat Matasar there. I think a lot of Spurs fans are very, very excited about. Really young prospect, one that you feel maybe if he's given a decent amount of game time, there might need to be a need to look at the outside. That when again you say, and I say to you, a 39-man squad. And I know people will hate me for this because me and Matt, we love the signings. We all want more signings, but you do wonder how many more signings could Tottenham make before the squad's going to really, burst. We're literally, as Matt said, I think we have to have 2 changing rooms. We might have to use the away changing room to have the players changing in there. I mean, what do you think, Mike? Do you think Spurs will look for a replacement for Højbjerg, or do you think they may look internally to what they've got?
I think Gallagher would be, if Gallagher did come in, he'd be a like for like replacement in terms of the squad numbers and the squad and that position. But like you say, Papasar is somebody. I've only watched him a couple of times. I think it was against Milan last season. I was just in a game where Spurs were not on top. I think he was absolutely fantastic. There's some real potential there. I think from the way that Ange has kind of played him in pre-season, there is the suggestion that he might get even more first-team opportunities there. I've always been a fan of Skipp. When I said I'm not sure about him, which Matt picked up on, when I said I'm not sure about where his situation would be in terms of loan or stay. In terms of a young, good, excellent young English talent, I think he's really, really promising. And probably, if you ask my opinion on it, probably one that I'd probably want around the squad rather than not have around the squad if I was Ange Postecoglou.
Now, Matt is, of course, going to ask you in a second about the captain and the vice captain, who could be the captain, depending if he's going to stay at the football club. That in itself could be in a situation in a second. I just want to ask you, Mike, we mentioned it off air, just for viewers and listeners that would be asking maybe some questions around how Spurs and Chelsea would ever do business. I wonder if you've kind of got a view on that you want to maybe share in terms of if that would happen. If we're mentioning Conor Gallagher's name, there'll be many Spurs fans thinking, well, hold on, we haven't done business since we go back to the days of, and we mentioned this again in previous shows, you look at, it was Kudicini on a free transfer, Neil Sullivan, when you go back all those years. I mean, where does, in your opinion, that relationship stand now between the Spurs hierarchy and the Chelsea hierarchy, since there's obviously, of course, been that change of ownership at Chelsea?
Well, down the years, it has been, it's just not been a no-go area in terms of, decades. If you're talking about first team, I think there've been like some academies, like Broja, I think might have been at Spurs once upon a time. Real academy stuff aside, it's just first team players. It just hasn't been, just particularly during the 2010. For a decade, they just haven't had business, and there's been bad blood between the clubs. I think Chelsea once upon a time had a little look at Ben Davies as a left-sided centre back, but it just wasn't the possibility of those two clubs doing business. But I do think that, from what I've been told, since the new American owners at Chelsea, who have kind of changed the rules on the transfer market anyway themselves in terms of what they've been doing, and that this relationship is also one that's changed as well, and that there is the possibility that there could be a deal between the two clubs if that one goes forward. I don't think it's totally off limits anymore.
Well, I'm going to keep this next question short and sweet. How is Hugo Lloris still at this football club?
it's a really strange situation in the market because you see people going to Saudi Arabia and getting, millions of tax-free wages every few months out there, and you see Jordan Henderson signing multi-million pound deal to join Steven Gerrard. But it's actually goalkeepers it's difficult because while Mendy has gone out there, you've got David De Gea is still on a free transfer, and you'd think that he'd get something. I just don't think it's quite as easy to get the money out there. If you're taking away Saudi Arabia, you'd think, because I think Hugo Lloris, there was some interest from Inter Milan, but Inter Milan are just, they're a selling club now, really. I don't think you'd be going there to get mega wages like you might think, and the same with AC Milan and those other Italian clubs. And I think there'd be more lucrative deals to be done mid-table Premier League, to be honest. So it's not quite as easy as you think getting a deal straight away. So I think Hugo Lloris, we know where we stand with him because he didn't go on tour, and that he can pursue a transfer away. And it just might not be as straightforward to get the deal that he wants. I know that there's been I think Nice has always been a dream of kind of the club and him as well, because that's where he grew up. But obviously they've got their own goalkeeper issues themselves to resolve. So I think, how is he still at the club? I don't know is the answer to that one.
Before Matt asked you about the headline topic, Mike, do you think there's a genuine, possibility that we've seen Spurs do this in the past with, you'd say arguably Matt Doherty, Serge Aurier, that essentially could they start ripping up contracts? I think he's got a year left, Hugo Lloris. If we're in a situation where, look, we're coming into, we're the 9th of August now. We've got less than 3 weeks left of this transfer window. We've got a 39-man squad. Does it get to a point when you have to start thinking about, do we even keep these players on contracts? Do we look to maybe mutually terminate contracts? Lloris got a year left. Is it worth keeping him? They'll be paying maybe more in his wages than what they would do if they maybe reach a mutual agreement with him. Do you think that might be a possibility Spurs might go down between now and into the window?
Possibly. From how I've seen it down the years, players don't particularly want to give money away back to the club that they've got in terms of guaranteed contracts, and so I think there'd have to be negotiations there to be done. So, but there's also a kind of sentimental point to Hugo Lloris as well, which is the fact that he has been a very, very good servant to Spurs as well, and whether that might come into play. The fact that he's been captain of the club, and whether they might say, right, we can have a look at you on a free transfer. Although really, I don't know how the dynamic works. They're also, would he be? I don't think there's a possibility of him, but would he be welcome back into the squad if he doesn't have a club? I'm not too sure on that.
That would be mad, wouldn't it? The fact that Hugo Lloris coming out and saying publicly that he would want to leave the football club to then explore new opportunities and to not get a move. Yeah. That would be, it would be really, really interesting. It really would be. Right, we have reached that point in the show where we were fearful to start with this topic, it was going to derail it. And George Band's calling for it, so it is time to bring it into context. It is time to discuss Harry Kane and where we are. Matt, I will hand back to you.
Yeah, Mike, you might have heard that Bayern are interested in signing Harry Kane this summer transfer window. Look, it's all we've been talking about for the last couple of months, and there's been deadlines set, and there's been new bids put in, and there's been add-ons changing these bids, and it just seems to be a little bit of a mess really over the last couple of weeks. But as it stands, it seems as though Bayern are still pushing and trying to get that one done. Can you just tell us what the latest is on this, and I suppose on a personal level as well, where you expect this one to go?
Yeah, as I said to you before, the great thing is that nobody knows what is actually going to happen, and what club he will be playing at. Nobody knows definitively, even though we work off the information that we try and get and put in our website and newspapers. So my view on it is that obviously Bayern are kind of preparing another deal. There was a kind of self-imposed deadline that they put for last Friday, which I think was quite laughable, really, that they thought that Daniel would even respond to that. And then there's almost this other kind of softish deadline of Friday, which is the start of the Premier League season, when Harry would really probably want everything done and dusted before then, so that you could concentrate on the season. My personal view is that I think it's going to rumble on. I don't think it's what you want to hear. You're shaking your head, Ricky, but it is. But I think it's going to go to the wire, actually, and I think that there will be bids put in during the season, and just the way I see it kind of map out, I can see Bayern sticking in there and really kind of asking the question of Spurs on August. Actually, it's the 1st, isn't it? It's on September the 1st is the deadline of whether you want to lose Harry for free in January, which is when he can speak to other clubs about a pre-contract.
I'm sure Matt has also got a couple of follow-up questions. One I want to ask you, if you don't mind, Mike, is that it appears, and look, tell me if I'm wrong here, that it feels like Harry's camp has been leaking the fact that he would be open still and leaning towards staying at Tottenham if a deal can't be done with Bayern Munich. And it just feels the longer this goes on, the more this weighs as a real unfair and disrespectful nature, or not just Postecoglou, but the Spurs fans as well, that we've got to start to a Premier League season, which has now been massively overshadowed. Look, you've covered Spurs for many, many years. When I read off these names to you, you'll know where I'm going with this. Berbatov, Modric, Bale, Carrick, all these names that in previous summers with Tottenham, we've had a situation where a player's future has absolutely dominated the summer. And with no disrespect, the media naturally have to go with that and run with that. And look, we've got media channels that are now covering sport news 24 hours. We've got people that, of course, have to write newspapers and obviously have to fill vlogs for their jobs. It just feels a really, really unfair situation to the fans and, of course, the manager, who, to be fair, I think he's handled this absolutely exemplary, and why many Spurs fans have warmed even more to the manager because of how he's dealt with this situation. So do you have a personal view that the longer this goes on, even for Harry's sake, it just isn't a good look? Do you view that or not? I mean, it seems like from the outside looking in, it seems Harry has imposed the fact that if the deal can't be done by the end of this week, he'll stay at Tottenham. But you seem to be indicating that you think it will run towards the end of the window. I
do think it will rumble on. Look, is it a great look? I tell you what isn't a great look is having a round of golf with Gary Neville and saying you want to join Man City. I don't think it's as bad as that. I think he's a player with a year left and he's looking at his options. That's the reality of the market and where Harry Kane is. And it is possibly, I mean, maybe it is unfair. It's very dramatic. Is it unfair? I think it is kind of, it's just where we are in terms of somebody who has got a decision on whether to play a season and go on a Bosman or whether to go now and what to pursue, what he's going to listen to. I think it's in terms of us, it's very, very, it's dramatic, and it's a real saga that we're kind of glued to our phones and trying to get every little last bit of information out of. I suppose we will get some resolution on September the 1st, and we will know. But until then, I think still, you just got to get ready for this kind of few weeks where it's going to be a really choppy ride.
Matt, do you want to come in on that? Come in there, Matt.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know, kind of taking away from the details of the deal for a second, but I'm curious to know what you think about Ange Postecoglou and his role in all this and how he's dealt with it. Because you kind of mentioned at the start, how well he's conducted himself with a few moments in Tottenham's pre-season, including that the Bill journalist showing the Harry Kane jersey. But I think Postecoglou, he's been so open and so honest in every time he's been asked about it in press conferences. He's not shying away and saying, we won't talk about transfers. He gives his answer, and he's pretty much said that he's ready whether we have Harry Kane or not in this team next season. So I'm wondering from a perspective of a manager coming into a higher profile job than he's ever been in before, coming into the Premier League, and of course Celtic are a huge club, but how you think he's dealt with that so well?
I think it's his natural touch, the way he is, his personality, which is a guy who is in his 50s but looks like he can really relate to young players and really relate to elite players at the very top of their game. I think that's just the way he is with people. That's the impression that I get with him. And you asked whether it's important that the role of the manager. I really do think it is, particularly if Postecoglou can get off to. So let's say Harry's in the team for the next few weeks and he stays at Spurs. If Spurs are in the top four and Postecoglou's kind of the gamble has paid off, and his gambles have paid off, and Spurs' gambles have paid off, and everything's come off for them this summer, you're looking at a completely different complexion of the club. You're looking at somebody actually. Yeah, we're back in those top four, top six places that we feel that we should be in, and that's a real different feel to where they have been. So that does, yeah. So I think Postecoglou has a huge role in terms of Harry, and particularly if he stays, yeah.
I know we want to ask you, Mike, about some potential striker names that have been mentioned, but just a couple more questions on the Harry thing. I hope you don't mind. You mentioned, of course, the first time of a potential move was Man City, and the way of Harry tried to orchestrate that. This time it has been a bit different. I would put it as though his camp, in my opinion, have been a bit more smarter. It feels as though they're kind of leaving themselves open where if an opportunity comes in where that bid is accepted, he'll talk to Bayern. It's so hard to try and ask you this without trying to, because we don't know. If we're being honest with you, the only people that genuinely know if Harry's going to go is himself and Daniel Levy, based on when Bayern next bid and if Spurs accept that bid. But from the outside looking in, you've covered transfers for such a long time. The mindset and the profile of what you've seen this summer from Harry, do you genuinely still see this happening? Can you feel this happening, or do you feel this is a lot different to Man City of 2021, where it was really pushing for that move?
I think it's very different. There's just a real different dynamic to it, and I think back then, I think it was quite easy for Daniel to reject the offers, which were not at the level, and also the fact that he would be going to a Premier League club. I think the dynamic's different. If you go to somebody, I think it would really soften the blow to sell him to a league where, let's face it, that it's just not the Premier League, is it? The Bundesliga just isn't the same, and so I think Daniel wins in that respect by either selling him or keeping him, and saying I had no choice either way, really. So yeah, I think there's a real different dynamic to it this time, and it's certainly different to doing an interview with Gary Neville and saying I really want to go.
Before Matt asks you about potential alternative targets, can I ask you, Mike, from my perspective, what you've made of the way Bayern Munich have handled themselves during this courting of Harry? If I call it courting, it feels more like stalking. How would you describe the way in which they've gone about trying to orchestrate this move for Harry?
I mean, they've made some huge mistakes. For a start, every time the bid comes in and you hear that there's add-ons, that you just think, well, that's just not the way Daniel Levy works. He will not want any add-ons. He'll want it all up front. So they've made some mistakes there as well. And the publicity over people flying over to London, I don't think would have gone down that well at the Spurs end either. From just working with the club down the years, I think they would have taken a dim view on that.
Interesting. George, we're going to come back to your question, I promise you. Matt, will hand to you, and then we'll come back on George's question. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, Mike, about a few potential replacements. I emphasize potential for Harry Kane. So there's been a number of names linked, especially in the last week, along with the signing of Alejo Beliz from Rosario Central. We're reportedly interested in signing the Ghent forward Gift Orban, who actually scored a hat-trick in the Conference League this evening, with names such as Jonathan David, Randall Kolomoani, and Porto's Mehdi Taremi being mentioned as well. Do you know if the club are looking at any of these players with a view to them replacing Kane, or could some of these potentially be players to complement Kane this season?
Those names are not ones that I've been working on myself, that I've heard myself, and that's not to discredit at all. I think the Times did Gift Orban. My mate Gary Jacob would have done that, and I'm sure that would have come from a really, really good place if he was reporting that. I don't think that they're down the line, like right down the line with a striker, from what I hear, and I personally kind of think that they're in the same market now as a few of the other clubs in the Premier League, like what Man United were before they made their big signing, and then there's a few that they've looked at in the Italian market. Beto at Udinese a year ago was kind of on their radar, or he's certainly been on the radar of Premier League clubs. Ones like that, I think that they would look at. They're in that bracket, which is really, as fans probably don't want to hear, because I've talked about risk before with you, with Harry. Zero risk going into the season. You know exactly what you're going to get, and even if it means a couple of months out with an ankle injury, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get 25, 30 goals. Whereas I think anybody coming in, there's going to be that element of risk that can they replicate even, half or three quarters of what Harry Kane can do.
Mike, I promise you the interrogation is coming to a close. We've got a couple more questions to ask you, if that's okay. I know we're taking over the hour mark. We're taking to stoppage time where we try to keep the ball in play, although we know the rules now. We've got to carry on. There is no stoppage in play. So we are going to quickly just ask you these questions, Mike. We will let you go. George asks you, question for Mike in the pod. Do you feel Spurs will be better judged to have had a better window with Kane staying and the addition so far, or him leaving and reinvesting the money? Do you have a view on that question?
Yeah, I think staying is a victory. Staying is a huge victory for Spurs, because I think Harry Kane is he's likely, or he's very much in the running to be Premier League top scorer if he stays. I think with even with Haaland. So I just think it's. I know it's a bit reductive to put it down to this, but it is kind of, with or without him, is kind of the make or break, really. And I just think with him, they're a completely different team, and it's a completely different window.
Perfect. Matt, let's finish off for you, my friend.
It's my favourite question. I always love going with this one. It's a bit of a two-parter for this one, Mike. The first one is a little bit easy to just easy win. Then the second one is the one that every guest on the show absolutely hates. But first part of this is I want to ask what you feel will constitute success for Ange Postecoglou in the coming season. And I think my kind of opinion, this has shifted a little bit when you're looking at the demographic of player that we're bringing in, and how it seems to be something that he's looking to build rather than have an immediate impact of getting us back in the top four maybe this season. But I'm interested to see what you think about that. And the second part of that question, how many players do you think Spurs will sign between now and the 1st of September?
Okay. The second part of the question, I think they'll probably get another two in, maybe something like that. Well, they're active, aren't they? They're always active, even when they've done all their business. They're still having a look on deadline day. I don't think it's ever done at Spurs. What constitutes success is I say it's a tough question. It's not that tough, really. I think to be competitive in the European places would be a really, really good season for Postecoglou, and that means being in and around the sixth or seventh. And I think I was there when Woodgate scored his goal at Wembley. I think it was, and I was there, and it was 2008. It was a long time ago. I think by the time we get to next year, it'll be 16 years.
Don't remind us, Mike.
16 years. And I always think,
mad. So
I
crazy.
understand it when you get to January and managers are fighting for their job and they don't want to risk players in the FA Cup third round and things like that. But my personal view is that I think that the cups are a real, just has the real possibility of springboarding a club from being, kind of fighting to get into European places to actually being winners. Even Man City started with the FA Cup, and it's, I think the FA Cup or the EFL Cup, like Man U did last season, I think that's a real good springboard, and I think Spurs fans appreciate that as well with their history as well with Wembley. I think they would appreciate some silverware.
Please, starved of it, Mike. Starved of it. We're not sure what it looks like anymore. I tell you, my God. Especially when you got that down the road that are even winning the mini cup, should I say? It's a difficult, period. But look, I've got to say, Mike, it's been a fascinating hour and a bit. I've got to say, there's been lots of love for you throughout this show. I've got to say, there's obviously a lot of Spurs fans that follow you very, very closely. For those that haven't followed you closely and would love to follow you closely even more, as the comments and love keep pouring in for you, Mike. Again, what a great show. Mike has been brilliant as a guest. These journeys with some of these shows are my favourite. Keep them coming. Thank you so much, Andy. Mike, where can everybody follow you across social media and, of course, the work you do for the Telegraph as well from a Spurs perspective? And I must say, from not just Spurs, you cover quite a number of Premier League clubs as well. Yeah,
so first of all, I work for the Telegraph. So we're on telegraph.co.uk/football. We got myself. Matt Law does a fair bit of Tottenham. Sam Wallace, Jason Burt. We're all at it trying to get the next story. And the next transfer, and then my Twitter is @McGrath Mike, which I'm on, and I read and I'll reply hopefully to who I can when they're polite.
Very nice. Lots of love for the jumper as well. Rebecca loves your jumper, Mike. Can I just ask? I know you're going to cover the transfers, just don't cover the big one, right? Unless you need to, please. Unless in a positive way. I think again, as you say there, whatever happens for the rest of this window, it's fair to say I think Spurs, it's not going to stop until the deadline. So it's a good job we are still here. Like I say, covering you every step of the way on Last Word on Spurs. Mike, I want to say a massive, massive thank you. Been an absolute pleasure. Matt, welcome back. We're glad the dogs are okay. The internet is back and we're ready to rock and roll, Matt. Thank you so much.
Look, I don't think there's any better way to set out for the last month of the window than actually having internet. So I'm quite excited. But yeah, always a fantastic show in here. Mike, thank you very much for your time and your insight. And hopefully there'll be some more good news that you can bring us for Spurs in the last month of the window.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Guys, from all of us here, from myself, from Matt, from the wonderful Mike McGrath, we've been the Last One on Spurs. Please keep safe, keep well. And as always, come on you Spurs.